And our first presentation is going to be on urban wilderness, so how wilderness exists in cities. And our first presenter is going to be Indra Starke-Ottich from the Senckenberg Research Institute in Germany, an expert for urban ecology. Indra, are you ready?
So I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. Then you can take it from here.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you a little bit about urban wilderness, which is a lot of differences to the other wilderness projects, I guess. And also about our project, Cities Der Wilderness, which runs for 5 years in 3 German cities. It's the cities Frankfurt, Hanover, and Dessau. And all of these cities have a scientist partner. And we have all together with Bio Frankfurt a partner for public relations. And this is really important, which I'll tell you later. The goals of this wilderness project in an urban surrounding was the supporting conservation by providing spaces for species and biodiversity development, but on the other hand, also improving life quality for the inhabitants of the cities, fostering curiosity and interest in wildlife, and making natural environments accessible, creating new urban landscapes and making experience with maintenance and usage, which is also a matter of finances. And we see it also as a pioneer project, so pioneering various options and schemes for urban wilderness projects so that we can give later advice to other cities who maybe want to try urban wilderness themselves. The 3 cities that we have chosen differ a lot in many aspects, but the main aspect here is the population development. The city of Frankfurt has an enormous increase of the population in the last years. And for this, there's a high pressure on landscape. And so the city of Frankfurt can only participate with 2 wilderness areas within their city limits. Hanover is also an increasing city, but it's a moderate increase of the population. And so Hanover has 10 areas. Dessau-Roßlau has a completely different aspect because the population is decreasing here. And so this is the city with the most areas in the project. So very, very different starting points in all of these 3 cities. But before I come back to the project itself, I want to tell you a little bit what is special about urban wilderness, because on the first view, this may look like a contradictory, urban and wilderness. How can this go together? So I start with a picture of classical wilderness, and here in opposite urban wilderness, we have to face the fact that there's humans inside our wilderness. We have to simply accept humans as a species that is acting in our areas. So they are not standing beside, they are not like a disruptive factor, they are a genuine part of urban wilderness. This is a major difference, I think. And also the availability of areas in cities is of course very limited because, as you all know, cities, most of the city area is used for buildings, for traffic and industry, and in many cities also for agriculture. This means urban wilderness areas are very, very small compared with traditional wilderness projects. To show you one of the extremes, here you see in yellow a wilderness area in the city of Hanover. You see it's very small and surrounded on all edges from residential areas and streets. So there's a lot of pressure on it. The theoretical background for the whole project is the concept of urban nature based on the work of Kovarik. And he makes a division in 4 types of urban nature. And here you see them sorted by their ecological novelty. Type 1 are relics of original nature. So the oldest forms of nature we find usually in form of little islands in some cities. Type 2 is relics of rural landscapes, so with meadows, orchards, or fields. Type 3 is cultivated green space and gardens. And type 4, here we find spontaneous growth on urban or industrial sites. If we don't sort these types of nature, urban nature, after their ecological novelty, but look on the aspects that are going on now, we find that type 1 and type 4 are dominated by natural processes nowadays, while type 2 and type 3 were dominated by anthropogenic land use. And if we now focus on the types that were dominated by natural processes, they have a very different starting point, of course. And so we can speak about old wilderness and new wilderness in the urban surrounding. Besides this concept of 4 urban natures, Kovarik also introduced the concept of wilderness elements. Like here you see these ailanthus trees growing in a completely man-made surrounding. They can be seen as a wilderness element. Or if we stretch the term to the edge, all kinds of wildlife and spontaneous growth in cities can be seen as wilderness elements. This may look a bit weird on the first view, but it's very important. And the city of Hanover is using this in the project to transform a traditional gardening area with wilderness elements that were implemented mainly in the public places of this gardening area, combined with education, and to bring the inhabitants that use the gardens here one small step closer to nature. And so we are already in our project, and the scientific partners do research about ecology and also sociology. And we learned a lot about the differences between the cities. For example, a very densely populated city, the inhabitants are happy to have a bit of wilderness close by, while in a decreasing city population, the inhabitants would prefer to have infrastructure there, and were not so happy about the wilderness project, at least at the beginning. What we also find out is that there's a big difference in the acceptance between old and new wilderness. Old wilderness, like here in one of our project areas in Frankfurt, is very much appreciated by the inhabitants. Nearly everybody likes it. It's like having a holiday going there. So this is very good. But new wilderness, early stages of succession on urban and industrial sites, were not appreciated. People have the feeling of a lost place. The cities do no longer take care of these places. They get untidy, ugly, whatever. So they have an image problem. And this image problem leads to a garbage problem that we find in all cities on these places of new wilderness. So what we learned in the project is that we need a lot of effort to get the acceptance of the inhabitants of a city for natural succession close to residential areas and to the type of new wilderness. Very important, but even very contrary to wilderness, to the wilderness idea, is adding infrastructure and information. But it's absolutely necessary to add such things, at least at the entrance areas. Okay, we don't want to have it all covered with information sheets like a botanical garden, but at the entrances it's necessary so that people have a chance to understand what's going on and that this is not a lost place. Also, this year may look a bit weird on the first view, but we learned that it's important to show presence, to show the people that it's not a lost place within their city. And a good way to do it is mowing stripes, small stripes about a meter or less, along the pathways, so that people see, okay, it's not a lost place, it's not forgotten, the city is taking care of it. And maybe there's an idea behind it, the succession areas that are next to the pathways. So this is really important to do such things of management. Also, we learned that connection to arts and culture is a very good idea. On the left picture, you may see this wilderness bugs climbing a tree. The city of Hannover is using them, but also a lot of events and things like that help to bring these areas in the focus of the people and show that there's not lost places. And of course, very important, education for all ages, with a lot of different formats and events, and also public relations and all media types are really important, so that people know what is going on there and learn to accept urban nature and urban wilderness close to the residential areas. The ecology part has to face a very different question. Is urban wilderness always the same like natural succession? Between these two pictures is only a very few meters. It's in the same site, but there's 25 years in between. We have learned that early stages of succession can be extremely species rich and be habitat for a lot of endangered and rare species, because in our area or in our region, especially pioneer species have a problem and are on the red lists. If we leave this to natural succession, we come to a stage that can be extremely species poor and kind of boring. And of course, the red list species are gone here. Such an area would need another 200 years or something to turn the picture. But cities are very highly dynamic places, and politicians don't want to wait 200 years to see a result. And we are under a high pressure not to lose our red list species in the area. So we have big discussions about what should our urban wilderness be. Also, we have requirements due to species conservation laws and formal things. In the time from the idea of the project until the funding started, this little bird settled on one of our areas. And so we have to keep the habitat for this bird in a good condition, which means that we have to set it back every year to an early succession stage. So this is very contradictory to our idea of urban wilderness and natural succession. In urban areas, we have a special problem with neobiota. If we leave everything to natural succession, there's a lot of neophytic plant species that can grow there. Here you see the most problematic species. It's the raccoon. That's really harmful to our amphib population especially, but also to ground breeding birds. And then we have Himalayan blackberry in nearly all of our areas, which can also cause species losses. In general, we accept this also as a part of urban wilderness, the same like we accept humans acting there. But locally, we try to manage Himalayan blackberry due to species conservation issues. Then there's happening a lot of landscape design in our areas. Some of it is unintentional. For example, we have the beaver acting on some of the sites, but also on the right picture, you see landscape design by humans, which was not intended. On the first view, you might think, oh, these damn humans, have they to work everywhere through this nice meadow with all the flowers? But it's not as negative as it looks on the first view, because by this acting they created a new habitat, And this habitat is important and is used by many bee species, also endangered species, that find pollen and nectar in the plants nearby and can settle in the sandy soil of this pathway. So the impact of humans on our areas is not always negative. We have a couple of examples like this one. But we went a step on and do intentional landscape design as well. This here was meant to create a new habitat for insects that live in sandy soil, mainly wild bees again. And it, of course, has nothing to do with wilderness on the first view, but if we leave it for itself for the next years, we get nature type 4. We just arranged how the starting point is looking, but then it can develop on itself. And the idea behind this special action is that insects that live in sandy soil close by will lose their habitat due to natural succession. And so we offer them a new habitat. They will lose one, but they get a new one. So that's the idea behind this. If I come to a conclusion about this short talk about urban wilderness, I have to say, in our point of view, it is not a contradiction, but it has to balance a lot of requirements. We have species conservation issues on our areas. We have to manage our areas in a way that we get public acceptance for what we do. But also, of course, we want space for natural succession. So we put this all together on our very, very limited space that we have in the city surrounding. I think that is a good thing and really necessary to keep such areas in cities, and we hope that other cities might follow in the future. Okay, that's basically it, and now I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Indra, for this interesting talk. And now we already have the first question from Isaac. So now that we're moving more and more towards removing cars from the city, which take up a lot of space in the moment in major cities, how do you think that will influence urban nature and urban wilderness?
Well, depending how we manage it, it has, of course, a lot of influence. First is, of course, air quality. Sure, that's one of the reasons why we do it. But if we are really consequent with doing it, we can get a lot of new space for urban wilderness ideas or for developing urban nature by removing the asphalt or whatever was there before. So this is something we are discussing also in Frankfurt to make Frankfurt more safe for the climate change, to remove as many of the streets as possible and get more green into the cities, even if it's maybe small stripes, and if not the whole street is removed, but only a small stripe of it. But even this can help to bring more green and more urban nature back into the cities.
Okay, thank you. Maybe you can elaborate on what the difference is. You showed this graphic in the beginning that you have Frankfurt in the project where the population is rising, and then Dessau where it's shrinking. How the challenges are different depending on how population changes within the cities.
So I don't get the question.
Yeah, you said that when these spaces get available, that we have to fight to promote nature in them. Yep. And you have the two different cities with very different population development, Frankfurt and then Dessau. Yep. One where the population is rising quickly and the other one where the population is decreasing. How different are the challenges in these two cases?
Okay. Well, in Frankfurt, the difference is always to get land for urban nature, because The population raised about more than 100,000 inhabitants in the last 10 years. So there's new residential areas rising everywhere. And there's a fight about each square meter of the city. Should we build houses there, or can we use it for nature development? So this is the main challenge here. But the wilderness project itself was very well accepted by the people, because there's so many houses and things everywhere in Frankfurt. People like to have a little bit of nature close by, so they are very happy about it. In Dessau, it was difficult. The population is shrinking, and people see a lot of or have a lot of worries about their city, and see how their city goes down, and many people there don't have very much income, and so they did not like the idea of wilderness close by. Dessau faces this problem with zones. So close to residential areas in Dessau, they make a lot of management, and the bigger is the difference, the distance to the houses, the more natural succession they have there. And this helped for getting the acceptance of the people. More management close to the houses and less management in the outer lying areas.
Yeah, and we got a comment here from Ingrid, who just emphasizes again that you cannot underestimate the acceptance of people, and that education is so interesting. And yeah, even though you said in the beginning that urban wilderness is of course different from classic wilderness, a lot of issues are the same. It's mostly about creating acceptance from the people, no matter if it's right next to their doorstep or in an area that's more remote or bigger.
Yeah, this is why we included this sociological studies to check this during the whole project. But we see this garbage problem is really, really huge in cities. At the moment that people think it's a lost place, then they bring the waste there. So this is really problematic. At the beginning, we had the idea that cities can save money if they don't manage the areas and leave them for natural succession, so they don't have to spend money anymore for the management. But we have seen that the costs explode for cleaning up the places. So we have one area in Frankfurt that has to be cleaned twice a week, and still is looking, yeah, there's garbage everywhere if you go there. So costs can also explode if you not get the acceptance by the inhabitants.
Okay, we got another question from Isaac. He asks, what policy changes could cities implement that could benefit urban wilderness? For example, removing fences and replacing them with hedgerows.
Yeah, there's a lot of things like that going on, especially in the new built areas. They make a lot of restrictions that people should not have fences, as said, or that they should plant at least one tree in their garden, or greening the facade and things like that. These were regulated by politics in our city, yes.
Okay, I see another comment. Yeah, Ingrid commented that especially regarding the current discussion about climate change and how we can mitigate it, that increasing urban nature and urban wilderness can only be a win-win situation. Yeah, and like you said, it's not only important for biodiversity, but also for climate in the city and so many other benefits.
Yes, true.
Okay, I don't see any more. Ah, there's the next question. Okay. Ariane wants to know if there are any differences you see in the succession in these areas that differ from the normal succession you would expect.
Well, sometimes we are surprised. We have an area which is an open area in the middle of a forest, and what we expected was, well, normal forest succession, but now we have a lot of Budleia and other neophytes there. That was really surprising. But in general, yeah, we see the usual stages of succession we find elsewhere in middle of Europe.
Yeah, we have a question that maybe goes in a similar direction about what you just said. What about dogs? And you just said that neophytes are a big problem. So how do species that normally don't belong there influence this urban wilderness and the process?
Yes, dogs is a big issue on our areas. But what we see, if natural succession goes on until a certain point, then then people lose interest to go there, because if you have dense stands of any shrubs and trees, then it's not so comfortable to go there, and then people stop going there with their dogs anyways. So no one wants to go through a rubus shrubs, and so we see it's the early stages that were mainly of interest for the people to go. We have dogs, we have people sitting there having a barbecue or whatever, and then leaving the garbage again. But during the natural succession, this problem decreases. And we learned that wildlife can deal very well with it in cities, mostly at least. So like birds, and we have the beaver, we have different kind of species there, and that they learned how to hide during the day and using the night hours. And we were really impressed how much species we can find in urban wilderness areas.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all.
Great.
I don't see any more questions at the moment. So thank you for this presentation. I think there were some very interesting questions, so people seem to be interested in this topic. It's of course different from what we've heard so far, where we mostly talk about big areas that are as untouched by people as possible, which is the traditional definition of wilderness. But this is a very different but very important approach to bring wilderness to people and not only separate wilderness and people.